The final dusting of crushed rosemary was a shield and a prayer. It was pungent, heavy on the nose really, but Zuri had crushed the herbs between her fingers until the oil coated her skin, making the scent strong enough to mask the smell of baby powder clinging to her apron. Zuri glanced down beneath the stainless steel prep table, where her 6-month-old son, Kofi, slept with a stillness that only a hidden child learns to master. His curly hair, a jet-black copy of his father's, was damp with the humidity of the kitchen. His eyes were closed, thank God for that at least. If he opened them, the secret would be out. One eye a warm, chocolate brown like hers, the other a piercing, icy blue. "Stay asleep, my little sous chef," she thought, the silent plea making her chest ache. She adjusted the repurposed vegetable crate he lay in, a fragile sanctuary she was getting good at concealing. "I know it's loud. Just a little longer." Deep down, she knew the truth. Their fragile arrangement, this hidden corner in the steaming, chaotic heart of the royal palace, was reaching a boiling point. Her luck had held for 6 months, a quiet grace allowing her to work as the executive chef while hiding the heir to the throne at her feet. But now, disaster was at the door. The heavy thud of boots and the sharp bark of the kitchen master were the only things filling her ears. Soon, the king would be filling the room. That night a year ago, with the stranger's body pressed against hers, feeling a warmth she hadn't known she was starving for, she had whispered a promise. No names. No titles. Just this. Her memory was a low hum in the back of her mind. The stranger had been the most powerful of them all, stronger than the liquor they drank, more commanding than the storm outside. He had a kingdom of gold and protocol, and everyone was afraid of him because his authority was a wall of stone. But he wasn't cold, her heart whispered, traitorous and terrified. Not that night. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make the man from that night a villain in her memories. Her heart wouldn't allow it. No, just lonely. She wiped her hands on her towel, the scent of garlic and fear rising from it. He had a great legacy, you see, the greatest in the pack. But one day he lost the only woman who treated him like a man, and he didn't know she had taken a piece of him with her. So he locked himself away in his high tower and let his senses dull. A single drop of sweat slipped down her temple, hot and silent. The cooking was a shield. A way to serve a man who was too dangerous to look in the eye. A king who wasn't just a boss. He was a memory that burned. A single reckless night of passion and anonymity. A night that had given her everything that mattered, and a secret that could get them both executed for treason. She didn't know what scared her more, the soldiers of Duke Sterling sniffing around for traitors, or the proximity of the Alpha King whose son was sleeping by her feet. The menu was an insult. Words on a velvet card, courses and pairings. Poached salmon. Steamed vegetables. A palate groaning under the weight of a long, flavorless tradition. King Alistair stared at the gold-embossed card, but the words blurred. They were meaningless. He tasted nothing. Nothing but a cold, familiar ash and the restless pacing of the wolf under his skin. It had been pacing for a year. "The inspection must be conducted, Your Majesty," the advisor said, his voice flat, echoing in the cavernous private dining hall. The polished mahogany table reflected the crystal chandelier, making the entire room look like a gilded cage. His council members murmured their agreement, led by Duke Sterling. Old vultures, their faces carved with political cunning. They watched him. They were always watching him, looking for any sign of weakness or distraction. He gave them none. He was their Alpha King. Power flowed from him like a winter storm, cold, absolute, and unforgiving. He had to be, because his alpha nature, the very core of him, demanded a mate, a pack, a sensation beyond endless protocols and hollow banquets. Instead, he had only this cage of duty. He dismissed the menu with a flick of his wrist, the heavy gold crest on his suit jacket flashing in the light. Alone, the silence was worse than their whispers. It was in the silence that the ghost returned. Not a face, just a taste. A phantom memory of spice, heat, and something else. Something uniquely intoxicating that his wolf had never forgotten. One night. One single catastrophic breach in the walls he'd built around himself. A woman whose name he didn't know, but whose fire was seared into his soul. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. He needed air. He needed to feel something other than this numbness. To the kitchens, Alistair commanded, striding toward the heavy double doors. The beast in his chest lifted its head, sniffing the air, hunting for the one thing that might make him feel alive again. Chapter 1. The royal kitchen operated on a hierarchy sharper than a boning knife. To the classically trained sous chefs in their starched whites, I was an anomaly, a street-taught prodigy with calloused hands and a spice palate that frightened them. They sneered at my fusion of southern warmth and high-court precision, whispering, "the stray," when they thought the clatter of copper pots drowned them out. Yet, when I mounted a glaze or balanced a reduction, the room went silent. They hated my background, but they respected the magic I worked on the plate. Eyes down, the kitchen master hissed, his voice cracking like a whip across the station. The alpha is here. The double doors swung open, and the air in the room was instantly sucked out, replaced by a gravity that made my knees tremble. King Alistair didn't walk, he prowled. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders like armor, the lapel emblazoned with the heavy gold royal crest, a roaring lion that seemed to mock the cage of duty he lived in. His face was a mask of bored, lethal indifference. He scanned the frantic chopping and searing with eyes that looked dead to the world, seeing everything and caring about nothing. He looked like a man starving at a banquet, utterly unimpressed by the spectacle of his own court. I kept my head bowed over the venison station, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Don't look at the crate. Don't look at the crate." Kofi was silent beneath the stainless steel table, hidden behind a barricade of 50-pound flour sacks. Alistair moved closer, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically on the tile. He stopped at the station next to mine, inspecting a tray of caviar hors d'oeuvres with a sneer of disdain. A member of his security detail, a burly guard with a wandering gaze, stepped back to give the king space. His heavy boot heel clipped the edge of the flour sacks shielding my son. Something small and blue skittered across the floor, spinning to a stop inches from the guard's boot. Time fractured. It was Kofi's pacifier. The guard looked down, his brow furrowing as he processed the alien object in this sterile, high-pressure environment. Panic, cold and electric, shot through my veins. If he picked it up, if he asked why a piece of blue plastic was on the floor of the royal galley, the crate would be found. "Chef!" I shouted, deliberately dropping a heavy copper ladle. It clattered against the stone floor with the violence of a gunshot, echoing off the tile walls. The guard jumped, his hand instinctively going to his holster. Even Alistair turned, his cold, predatory gaze snapping to me. I dropped to my knees, scrambling for the ladle, my hand sweeping the blue plastic pacifier into my palm in the same fluid, desperate motion. "Clumsy," I stammered, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor, clutching the plastic evidence so hard it cut into my skin. "Apologies, Your Majesty." Slippery hands. The guard grunted, annoyed at the noise, and turned back to the king. Alistair watched me for a second longer, a beat of terrifying, suffocating silence, before turning away, his boredom unbroken. "Carry on," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the floorboards beneath my knees. As he walked away, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, the taste of metal still sharp on my tongue. Chapter 2. The banquet tickets fluttered like white flags of surrender, poached pears, vanilla foam, tasteless perfection. The kitchen was a machine of compliance, but looking at the lifeless ingredients, a sudden, reckless defiance seized me. I couldn't serve him silence on a plate. Not again. My hands moved before my logic could stop them. I reached for the dark chocolate, the star anise, and the smoked sea salt. I was making the midnight tart. It was a ghost of a recipe, the very thing we had shared on a balcony rain-slicked with moonlight a year ago. It was stupid. It was suicide. But as I folded the spices into the ganache, I told myself he wouldn't remember. To a king, it was just a dessert, to me, it was a memory. I sent the plates out, my heart pounding a traitorous rhythm against my ribs. In the great hall, the silence was heavy. Alistair sat at the head of the table, the conversation of his council buzzing like gnats around him. He stared at the dessert placed before him. It wasn't the requested pear. It was a dark, glossy slice of rebellion. He picked up his fork, the motion languid, bored. He took a bite. The change was instantaneous. His spine stiffened. The fork clattered onto the china, the sound echoing through the sudden hush of the room. He didn't swallow the food, he devoured the memory it unlocked. The heat, the spice, the specific balance of bitter and sweet, it was a map leading straight back to the woman who had vanished. Who made this? His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a thunderclap. The kitchen master, standing by the service door, turned the color of ash. Your Majesty, I. Bring me the chef, Alistair commanded, standing up. Now. I was scrubbed from the line and shoved through the double doors before I could wipe the flour from my apron. The dining hall was vast, cold, and smelled of expensive wax and fear. I kept my chin tucked deep into my chest, the brim of my tall chef's hat casting a shadow over my face. I fixed my gaze on the polished tips of his shoes as they moved across the marble. Look at me, he ordered. I didn't move. I couldn't. If he saw my eyes, he would see the boy I hid beneath the prep table. He stepped closer. The air around him crackled with alpha energy, a physical pressure that made the hair on my arms stand up. He circled me slowly, like a predator inspecting a curiosity. He leaned in, inhaling deeply near my neck. I held my breath, praying the kitchen smells, the onions, the char, the dish soap, were enough. But Alistair froze. He didn't smell the food. He smelled the milk I had spilled on my collar earlier. He smelled the faint, sweet scent of vanilla baby powder. And beneath that, something that made his breath hitch, a lingering, haunting echo of the rain and musk from a year ago. You smell. He whispered, his voice losing its edge, replaced by a raw, confused hunger. You smell like a ghost. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from my chin, ready to tilt my head up and shatter my world. Chapter 3. The kitchen after midnight operated in a hushed, sacred silence, usually broken only by the hum of the cooling units. But lately, that silence had been invaded. Alistair started coming after the moon rose. The first time, he claimed he needed water. The second time, he said the council meetings had run late and he required sustenance. By the third night, we both stopped pretending. He wasn't here for the food. I was tempering chocolate for the morning pastries, the marble slab cool beneath my hands. The kitchen was empty, save for the Alpha King leaning against the stainless steel counter across from me. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He watched my hands work the spatula, his gaze heavy and tactile, tracking every movement. You work with a lot of anger, Zuri, he murmured, his voice low, sliding over my skin like warm oil. Precision, Your Majesty, I corrected, keeping my eyes on the glossy dark pool of chocolate. Not anger. It looks like passion to me. He pushed off the counter and moved into my station. The air instantly thickened, charged with a magnetic pull that made my breath hitch. He reached out, not to touch me, but to dip a finger into the bowl of chocolate. He brought it to his lips, his eyes locking onto mine. The gesture was so intimate, so blatantly suggestive, that my knees went weak. Dark, he noted, stepping closer until I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. Bitter. Like you. I am not bitter, sire. Then why do you refuse to look at me? He crowded me against the counter, trapping me between the marble and his hard body. Every time I come here, you hide. You retreat. He reached for my hand, the one holding the spatula. His fingers wrapped around my wrist, his thumb tracing the pulse that was fluttering wildly beneath my skin. The contact sent a shock wave straight to my core. It was the same electric current that had fused us together a year ago. I know this pulse, he whispered, leaning down, his nose brushing the curve of my neck. I know this scent. I wanted to lean into him. The pull was agonizing. My lips parted, a confession hovering on the tip of my tongue. A soft, muffled whimper cut through the tension. It came from the walk-in pantry, 10 feet away. Alistair froze. His head snapped up, his alpha senses instantly shifting from seduction to alert. He released my wrist and took a step toward the pantry door. What was that? He asked, his voice sharp. Panic, cold and absolute, washed over me. Kofi was waking up. I didn't hear anything, I lied, my voice trembling. A cry, Alistair said, moving past me. It sounded like a child. He was reaching for the handle. I grabbed the heavy cast-iron Dutch oven from the drying rack and shoved it off the edge of the counter. The crash was cataclysmic. Metal slammed against stone tile, the lid spinning away with a deafening, oscillating clang that echoed off every steel surface. Alistair spun around, startled, his hand flying to his waist. My apologies. I yelled over the ringing noise, dropping to my knees to gather the pieces. The oil, my hands were slippery. I'm so clumsy tonight. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The crash had masked the cry, but as Alistair looked down at me, his expression wasn't one of annoyance. It was a cold, calculating suspicion. He looked at the pot, then back at the pantry door, his eyes narrowing. Chapter 4. Duke Sterling watched from the shadows of the arched colonnade, his gaze fixed on the service entrance where the king had just disappeared. Again. For weeks, Alistair had been distracted, dismissing council meetings early, his eyes glazing over with a hunger that had nothing to do with politics. Sterling smoothed the cuffs of his velvet jacket, a predator sensing a limp in the herd. The king was compromised. Watch the kitchen, Sterling murmured to his shadow, a spy who melted seamlessly into the stonework. Every delivery. Every staff member. Find me the weakness. Down in the humid depths of the staff quarters, Zuri was already moving with the frantic energy of a cornered animal. The crash in the pantry had bought her seconds, not safety. Alistair was an alpha, his suspicion was a physical weight she could feel pressing against the back of her neck. She shoved a handful of cash and 2 changes of clothes into her worn duffel bag. Kofi was awake now, watching her from the cot with wide, mismatched eyes. We're going, baby, she whispered, her hands shaking as she folded his favorite blanket, a soft, knitted thing she had swaddled him in since birth. Tonight. As soon as the guard change happens. She turned to grab his formula, leaving the blanket on the bench for a split second. A heavy knock on the main door made her jump. Line check. All staff to the prep stations. Zuri froze. She couldn't leave with the bag now. She had to stash it. She shoved the bag under the cot, but in her haste, the small knitted blanket slid unnoticed to the floor, half hidden by a locker. She scooped up Kofi, hiding him back in the secure crate in the pantry, and rushed to the line, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm of escape. Minutes later, the door to the empty staff locker room creaked open. Alistair stepped inside. The air here was stale, smelling of bleach and old shoes, but beneath it lay that maddening, intoxicating thread of vanilla and rain. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that the pull was irresistible. He prowled past the rows of gray metal lockers, his senses on high alert. His boot brushed against something soft. He looked down. A small, pale yellow blanket lay crumpled on the concrete floor. It looked innocuous, a piece of fabric that didn't belong in a sterile kitchen. Alistair knelt, reaching out. The moment his fingers grazed the wool, the scent hit him like a physical blow. It smelled of the chef, the milk and sugar he associated with Zuri. But beneath that was something else. A bass note that made his wolf roar in recognition. He lifted the blanket to his face and inhaled deeply. Cedar. Ozone. The sharp, metallic tang of a storm. It was his own scent. Alistair froze, his mind reeling. He hadn't been in this room before. He hadn't touched this object. Yet the fabric was saturated with his own pheromones, woven tightly with the scent of a child. His grip tightened on the wool. This wasn't just a chef hiding a baby. She was hiding his baby. Chapter 5. The storm hammered against the palace stone, a relentless barrage that sealed the exits and trapped us all inside. It was fitting. The air pressure was dropping, making my ears pop and the blood rush in my ears. I sat on the edge of my narrow cot in the staff quarters, clutching Kofi to my chest. He was fussy, agitated by the thunder, his small fists gripping the fabric of my chef's coat. "Shoo," I whispered, rocking him. "It's just noise, baby. Just noise." The corridor outside was silent, then heavy footsteps broke the quiet. They weren't the hurried scuffle of other staff running from the leaks. They were deliberate. Predatory. A fist pounded on my door. "Room check. Open up." It wasn't a guard. It was him. Panic seized me, freezing my lungs. I couldn't hide Kofi in the crate, there was no time, and the storm had made him too restless to sleep. I wrapped the blanket tighter around him, shielding his face against my shoulder, and stood up, backing away as the lock clicked. The master key turned. The door swung open. Alistair filled the frame. He was soaked, his charcoal suit plastered to his broad shoulders, water dripping from his hair onto the collar of his white shirt. He looked wild, stripped of his usual board veneer. He held the yellow blanket I had lost in his other hand, a damp, crumpled flag of my betrayal. He stepped inside, kicking the door shut behind him. The room instantly shrank. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and wet wool, mixing with the terror radiating off me. "You weren't at your station," he said, his voice rough, like gravel grinding together. "The storm, sire," I managed, my voice trembling. "I came to check on my belongings." "Don't lie to me, Zuri." He tossed the yellow blanket onto the floor between us. "Not anymore." He stalked forward, closing the distance until I was pressed against the cold stone wall. He didn't look at me, his gaze was fixed on the bundle in my arms. He could smell it now, the milk, the powder, and the undeniable, biological truth that screamed to his alpha senses. The rain outside lashed against the glass, a chaotic backdrop to the stillness inside. "Show me," he commanded. "Please," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. "Alistair, don't." He reached out, his hand large and trembling slightly. He didn't grab me. He gently, almost reverently, touched the edge of the fabric covering Kofi's head. With a slow, deliberate movement, he pulled the blanket back. Kofi shifted, disturbed by the motion. He let out a soft huff, blinked against the sudden exposure, and opened his eyes. The silence that followed was louder than the thunder shaking the walls. Alistair stared. He stopped breathing. He looked into the face of a child with his own dark curls, his own strong jaw in miniature, and eyes that defied nature. One warm, chocolate brown. The other a piercing, glacial blue. Alistair stumbled back a step as if struck physically. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and shocked. He looked from the boy to me, the pieces of the last year, the mystery, the pull, the haunting familiarity, finally slamming into place. "He has my eyes," Alistair breathed, the realization shattering his world. "He's mine." Chapter 6. The silence in the room fractured, not with a shout, but with a terrifyingly quiet intake of breath. Alistair stared at Kofi, his hand hovering over the boy's face as if touching a mirage. The storm outside battered the glass, but the devastation inside was far more absolute. "You knew," Alistair whispered, his voice vibrating with a lethal mix of wonder and ruin. "From the moment you stepped into my kitchen. You knew." "I was afraid," I choked out, stepping between him and the crib, my body a trembling shield. "You are the king. I am nobody. I thought you would take him. And what have you done instead?" Alistair's gaze snapped to mine. The warmth that had been building between us for weeks was gone, replaced by the glacial indifference of the Wolf King. "You hid him in a crate. You stifled his scent. You let me walk past my own flesh and blood for months, treating him like a shameful secret." He stepped forward, the alpha energy rolling off him in suffocating waves. He didn't reach for me, he reached past me, scooping Kofi up with a possessiveness that brokered no argument. Kofi, sensing the shift in power, didn't cry. He just stared at the stranger who smelled like rain and authority. "Alistair, please," I begged, reaching for my son. He turned away, shielding the boy from me with his broad back. "You stole a year of his life from me, Zuri. His first breath. His first steps. You stole it all. I protected him." "You protected yourself," he snarled, turning back. His eyes were hard, the gold flecks consumed by a dark, wounded animal instinct. "Pack your things. You are done in the kitchen. Where are you taking us?" "Home," he said, the word sounding like a sentence. "To the royal wing. Where my heir belongs." The walk was a blur of humiliation. We were escorted not by guards, but by the king himself, marching through the service corridors, up the grand staircase, and into the restricted sanctity of the royal apartments. The air here was different, filtered, sterile, smelling of beeswax and old power. It was a world away from the humid, garlic-scented warmth of my kitchen. He brought us to a suite that was larger than the entire staff quarters. It was beautiful, draped in velvet and silk, but when the heavy oak door clicked shut, the sound echoed like a cell closing. "You will have everything you need," Alistair said, placing Kofi gently into a gilded bassinet that had been hastily brought in. He refused to look at me. "But you do not leave this wing. You do not speak to the staff. You are a guest of the crown, Zuri, but do not mistake this for freedom." He stood by the window, watching the rain, his silhouette stark against the lightning. He was 10 feet away, but he felt miles distant, retreating behind the walls of his castle, taking my son's heart with him and leaving me shivering in the cold luxury of my new cage. Chapter 7. The velvet silence of the royal wing was shattered not by thunder, but by the ringing of the iron bell, the signal for treason. I was pacing the floor with Kofi in my arms when the heavy oak doors shook. It wasn't a polite knock, it was a battering ram. Outside, the shouts of men echoed off the stone walls, distinct and terrifying. "Open in the name of the council." It was Duke Sterling's voice, projecting the false, righteous authority of a man staging a coup. I didn't need to hear the specific words spoken in the great hall to know what had happened. He had played his ace. He had stood before the elders, pointed a finger at the king's bastard son, and declared Alistair unfit to lead the pack. Now, he was coming to collect the evidence. The door splintered. I didn't scream. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. I looked at the heavy mahogany wardrobe, then the window. Both were traps. The royal wing was designed to be a fortress, but to a former servant, a fortress was just a series of service entrances painted over with gold leaf. "Get the boy," a soldier shouted as the doors gave way, crashing inward. 3 men in Sterling's livery surged into the room, weapons drawn. They expected a cowering mother. They expected a woman paralyzed by the luxury she had been locked in. They didn't expect the executive chef. I threw the heavy brass candelabra from the mantelpiece, not at the men, but at the crystal chandelier above them. It shattered, raining glass and cutting off their path for a split second. I didn't run for the main hall. I ran for the fireplace. To the royals, the massive hearth was for warmth. To the staff, it was part of the old ventilation system that connected the royal suites to the lower kitchens, a way to draft heat during the winter. I grabbed a poker, pried open the decorative iron grate at the back of the hearth, and squeezed into the dark, soot-stained chute behind it. "She's in the wall," one of the soldiers roared. I pulled the grate shut just as a boot slammed against the brickwork. The tunnel was tight, smelling of centuries of ash and cold stone. I clutched Kofi to my chest, shielding his face from the soot, and began to descend. I knew this darkness. I knew that 30 feet down, this chute intersected with the laundry service corridor, which led directly to the sub-basement pantry. I moved blindly, sliding down the rough incline, my silk guest dress tearing on the masonry. Kofi started to whimper, the vibration against my chest terrifyingly loud in the confined space. "Shoo, baby. Mama knows the way," I whispered, my voice trembling but my hands sure. We spilled out into the laundry tunnel, landing on a pile of discarded linens. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I could hear boots pounding on the floorboards above us, the sounds of Sterling's men tearing the suite apart. They would guard the grand staircases. They would seal the main elevators. But they wouldn't think to watch the garbage disposal chute or the spice delivery hatch. I wasn't a queen fleeing her castle. I was a chef navigating her kitchen. And in this house, the help knew secrets the masters never bothered to learn. I adjusted Kofi's weight, kicked off my expensive slippers, and ran barefoot toward the scent of garlic and safety. Chapter 8. The service tunnels offered a path to freedom, a one-way ticket out of the palace and away from the man who had claimed my son. I could have kept running. I could have vanished into the city streets, just another face in the crowd. But as I reached the sub-basement pantry, the scent of ozone and blood drifted down the ventilation shaft. Alistair was fighting. And he was losing. I looked at Kofi, safe and sleeping in the reinforced bread-proofing drawer I had tucked him into. It was steel-lined and soundproof. "Stay," I whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Mama has to go help the wolf." I didn't grab a sword, I grabbed a culinary torch and a jagged, heavy-duty cleaver from the butcher's block. I took the service elevator back up, not to the safety of the perimeter, but straight into the mouth of the beast, the main hall. The doors slid open to chaos. The room was a wreck of shattered marble and velvet. Alistair was a blur of violence in the center of the room, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt stained crimson. He was fighting 3 of Sterling's elite guards simultaneously. He moved with terrifying alpha speed, bone-breaking and lethal, but he was exhausted. A lucky strike from a soldier's baton caught him in the ribs, sending him stumbling back. Duke Sterling stood by the hearth, watching with a sneer. "Finish him." One guard raised a heavy broadsword. I didn't announce myself. I clicked the ignition on the torch. "Hey!" I screamed. The guard turned. I sprayed a mouthful of high-proof brandy I'd swiped from the cart through the torch's flame. A distinct, roaring fireball engulfed the space between us, singeing his eyebrows and sending him scrambling back in shock. Alistair didn't waste the distraction. He lunged, his fist connecting with the distracted guard's jaw with a sickening crack. "Zuri?" Alistair roared, spinning to face me, his eyes wild and golden. "I told you to run. I don't take orders from the floor plan." I yelled back, ducking under a swinging fist and jamming the handle of my cleaver into a soldier's solar plexus. "And I don't leave my pack behind." Something shifted in the room. The air grew heavier, charged with a new, terrifying electricity. Alistair looked at me, blood on his lip, fire in his eyes, and grinned. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the look of a wolf who just realized he wasn't hunting alone. Back to back, he commanded, stepping into my space until our spines touched. Don't step on my feet, I retorted, reigniting the torch. We moved as one organism. Alistair was the hammer, raw power and brute force, shattering defenses and throwing men like ragdolls. I was the scalpel. When a guard tried to flank him, I was there, blinding him with a burst of flame or slashing at armor straps with the cleaver. I used the environment, toppling heavy busts, sliding across polished floors, turning the luxury of the palace into a hazard course for Sterling's men. Sterling, realizing the tide was turning, drew his own weapon and lunged, not for us, but toward the service door I had left open. Toward the tunnels. Toward Kofi. He knows. I screamed. Alistair didn't hesitate. He didn't just run, he launched himself. He tackled Sterling mid-stride, the momentum carrying them both into the stone pillar with bone-shaking force. The Duke crumpled, his sword skittering across the floor. Alistair stood over him, chest heaving, his alpha dominance flooding the room so potently that the remaining guards dropped their weapons, falling to their knees in submission. The silence that followed was deafening. Alistair turned to me, his chest heaving, blood and sweat dripping from his chin. He crossed the room in 2 strides, but instead of checking his wounds, he grabbed my face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away a smudge of soot on my cheek. Our son, he choked out. Safe, I breathed, my adrenaline crashing. In the proofing drawer. He rested his forehead against mine, his trembling hands sliding down to grip my shoulders. You came back, he whispered, sounding like he couldn't believe it. You came back for me. We're a team, Chef, I said, a watery smile touching my lips. Now let's go get our boy. Chapter 9. The silence that followed the coup was broken only by the sound of Duke Sterling's boots dragging against the marble as the royal guard hauled him away. He didn't look like a duke anymore, he looked like a broken man who had bet against the wrong pack. His exile was pronounced not with a speech, but with a silent, terrifying glare from Alistair that promised death if he ever crossed the perimeter again. But Alistair didn't waste time watching his enemy leave. His focus was entirely on the woman standing beside him, covered in soot and smelling of accelerant. Come, he said, his voice rough with adrenaline and affection. It's time they saw you. Really saw you. He didn't lead me to the infirmary or the throne room. He led me to the grand balcony. The plaza below was filled with the pack, citizens, soldiers, staff, all drawn by the smoke and the rumors. My heart hammered against my ribs, a familiar staccato of stage fright, but Alistair's hand was a heavy, grounding weight on the small of my back. I'm a chef, Alistair, I whispered, clutching Kofi tight to my chest. I belong in the back of the house. Not anymore, he murmured, pushing the glass doors open. The roar of the crowd was a physical wave. Alistair stepped out first, raising a hand to silence them. The hush was instant. He reached for Kofi, taking our son into one arm, and with his other hand, he pulled me forward until I stood equal with him in the light. There have been whispers, Alistair announced, his voice carrying without a microphone, the true alpha command rolling over the crowd. Whispers of secrets. Of weakness. He lifted Kofi high, the baby's mismatched eyes, one brown, one glacial blue, catching the floodlights. Look at him. There is no weakness here. Only the future. The crowd gasped, then cheered, a low rumble that grew into a roar. But Alistair wasn't finished. He lowered Kofi and turned to me, ignoring the thousands of eyes watching us. He tucked a stray curl behind my ear, his expression softening from king to man. And this, he said, turning me to face his people, his hand gripping mine so tight it hurt. This is not just the mother of my heir. She is the fire that saved this house. She is my mate. She is your queen. The cheer that erupted shattered the last of my defenses. I wasn't the stray anymore. I was home. Hours later, the palace was quiet. The royal suite was filled with flowers and guards, but we didn't stay there. We went to the only place that felt real. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the warm glow of the oven pilot lights. But it no longer felt like a cage. There was no crate beneath the prep table. Instead, Kofi sat in a high chair Alistair had dragged in from the nursery, happily smearing mashed sweet potato over the tray. Alistair sat on a stainless steel stool, his suit jacket discarded, watching me work. I wasn't hiding behind the line this time. I was cooking a simple meal for three, moving with the rhythm of jazz humming low in the background. You missed a spot, Alistair teased, leaning over to wipe a smudge of flour from my cheek, his lips lingering on my skin. I smiled, handing him a tasting spoon. He didn't demand it, he accepted it. The kitchen wasn't a sanctuary for secrets anymore. It was just the heart of our home, warm, messy, and loud with the sound of a family that had finally stopped running.